This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? It's your boy Raul. Welcome back. On today's episode, I have a very good friend of mine, Andrew Raul Solis, founder and CEO of Cut Above Zero Proof Spirits. How's it going, Andrew?
Good. How are you, man?
Doing all right, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and I'm really excited to get into your journey. Um, so, just kind of talk a little bit about Andrew. Andrew Solis is the rare combination of a strategic thought leader and an efficient executive who matches talent with opportunity to deliver tangible business results. He is known for bridging the gap between ideas and results. His keen sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness, combined with an innate aptitude, has led him to become a self taught visual artist and worked for years in banking and consulting, and now set on a journey to create the world's best zero proof spirits. Focused on giving anyone, no matter their reasons for wanting to consume less alcohol, a unique zero alcohol spirit that mixes seamlessly in their favorite cocktails to reduce or replace the alcohol without sacrificing taste. Cut Above represents Andrew's philosophy on most things in life. No matter what the task, strive to make it a cut above everything else. Andrew, that's awesome, man. And like I said, for someone who's been going through my health stuff, you kind of came at a good time for me in my life, as I was quitting alcohol because of my health. And you came around with a zero proof alcohol, which is really hard, to kind of start off with, to get to at this point in time. But to start off, tell me a little bit about who is Andrew.
Well, I'd lead off with the biggest, deepest question.
Of course, man.
So who is Angelo? First, I'll say I'm a father and husband. Family takes first priority for me. So those are the first two titles that I'll claim. Behind that, I'm someone that looks to create a better world, and more specifically, a world that is inclusive when it comes to alcohol consumption. So whether someone is consuming alcohol, consuming a little bit less or none at all, my current drive and mission in life is to provide them with the best non-alcoholic spirits to be able to do that. It so happens that that's the product that does that, but inclusiveness has always just been a motivator for me and something I think the world can use a little bit more of right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I said, it's as someone who does not drink alcohol, finding any type. Everybody always keeps telling you, "Oh, why don't you try some of these non-alcoholic stuff?" And almost every non-alcoholic stuff has a little bit of alcohol, and it's just like finding something that's actually zero proof. Is pretty amazing. And so you're from Houston originally, and I believe you're still in Houston. Um,
Yeah, so
yeah. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Houston and what life was like with that.
yeah, so grew up here in Houston, on the north side of Houston. For those Houstonians who say what part of Houston, that's the first question. So the north side of Houston. Growing up here was great. I had a fantastic childhood. Houston back then was as it is now, which is like a hustle town, an inclusive space for the most part, where if you worked hard, you could carve out a good living for yourself and your family. So in the north part of Houston, there's my dad, my mom, myself, and a younger brother, minus 4 years on me. We grew up in the suburbs, as I would describe it. We went shopping, went to the mall, right? Everyone went there, and I would say for the most part, it felt like a fairly normal childhood. There wasn't anything that I thought was, different about our experience than those that I would go to school with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I lived in the north side in Humble, and Atascocita as well. So I love that part of Houston, and it's a unique place. And so I know when I talked to you and you filled out some of your pre-interview questions, you did mention that you were undiagnosed ADHD, which I think is something that a lot of people were probably undiagnosed back in the '80s and stuff like that. Nobody really cared. Nobody really knew. You mostly a bad kid. You're just bad. You weren't there was no real issue with you. Did
Right.
did you ever think looking back and stuff like that, see that, oh, this kind of were signs that maybe could have been picked up and how it might have affected you as you were kind of going through stuff as a kid?
Yes. But first, I'll say I love the fact that one I'm was willing to share this, but more so that you're willing to bring this up as a topic. If I think back to ADHD wasn't necessarily even a word, right? When
Mhm.
I was experiencing it, right, in school, more and more became talked about, became understood, became studied. Now somehow Instagram knows I have ADHD, so I get all these like video feeds, but they're amazing because they talk about how they deal with kids or kids who are in primary school with that, which is different than when I was there. So I wasn't formally diagnosed with ADHD until my late 20s. So I went through college, I went through primary school with this unique way my brain works, as I like to describe it. I forever thought everybody's brain worked like mine. I just was doing a really crappy or shitty job, you complete me, of managing life. That the brain would jump from one thing to another all the time. There was always like a recording playing in the back of my head, forgetting things really easily immediately after you told me them. All these things that are common traits of ADHD, I just thought that's how everybody's brain worked, because no one right ever told me different. And so in school, I would say one of the things that is a gift of ADHD for some is that you adapt. You have to adapt, right? Because sometimes it feels like you're drowning. And so one of the ways I adapted was to really almost like mimic and become a good observer of people and what others were doing, and helping let that help inform sort of what I should be doing as well. So there wasn't even anything in primary school that was, oh, I need to take notes a certain way or I need to go home, right? Because I didn't know like I needed to have this different kind of structure in my life. But I did know that in order to feel like I was functioning like others, I had to be able to understand others more. And so, why did they choose to play sports? Why did they place an importance on grades? Why are they socially able to have a conversation when that's difficult for me with others? Um, why are they not shy and why am I shy? So it built this very early on trait of curiosity in me that I'm so thankful it did, because being different in that particular way for me, because it bore that curiosity has served me probably out of anything else in my life, sort of an innate trait, better than anything else. So it wasn't necessarily that there was things that I would say would like if I would compare to others were harder. They were, but at the time I didn't compare. What I look back on now and remember was I felt different. Now I not necessarily know why. And because I felt different and didn't want to feel different, it led me to sort of develop these coping mechanisms, if you will, to be able to have to be able to function, right? To be able to function as a teenager, as a preteen, as a young adult, as a college student. All those things required adaptation, because of the ADHD that I had.
Yeah, no, it's amazing because it's amazing when you have something that you don't know you have and you figure out a way to overcome it. I look back now, I'm like, I probably had some levels of like dyslexia and ADHD as a kid as well. Um, and I grew up with my very immigrant parents where it was you were just bad and I'd get beat a lot. And so I kind of had to like overcome and work a little harder. And now as a parent, I'm more, focused on trying to find the right way of learning when I deal with my daughter and stuff, as opposed to just, being all upset about everything. And so when you're going through life as a kid and you're going through these type of struggles, and you're learning yourself, I think one of the things you put is that you're very self-taught and that you're very good at being able to learn. You've learned how to teach yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
And so one of the traits I've learned, that's very common for ADHD is it's often described like the brain of an ADHD person is like a Ferrari engine, but it's in a car with bad brakes. So I'm able to pick up things very fast. Like I'm a very fast study. So I can become average at anything, whether it's like a sport, learning something, a language, anything. Like I'm able to pick it up very fast. The challenge is that with that comes like this hyper focus, which is pretty close. I think there's a really thin line for me between like focus and obsession. The example I give, which I'm 43 years old, so is video games. So if I started a video game when I had time to play them, I would become obsessed with that game. I have to finish it all the way through. I'm going to give up sleep. I'm going to give up quality of life for that. If they learn how to do it very well, right, they're going to set all these like milestones and find these eggs and get this and time that. Like my brain would just latch onto that and pour and pour and pour over it. So that like that's a hard thing because in certain instances that's really beneficial. Like running my own company in an industry I didn't have experience in before. Yes, I need to learn things really, really fast, right? To avoid mistakes or to minimize the effect of mistakes. Um, but if I don't keep that in check and notice when I'm becoming obsessive about something, or notice when I'm overly focusing on something that isn't necessarily the most productive thing to be focusing on, that's the challenge part. I'm going to have that for the rest of my life. Like I know that, and I know I'm going to have great difficulties with it. But that knowledge of it, at least, like that self-awareness piece, I think is the cool part of it, because I make up there are people out there, right, who are still right undiagnosed with this, and it's this challenge of, okay, my brain works this way. I don't know why I can't focus, or I'm distracted easily. Um, but there is this really beneficial component to it, which is when we set our mind to things. When I set my mind to things, like I can really pick stuff up fast, and I'm thankful for that as a trait.
Nice, that's awesome. And did that help you at all? Like when you were, I know you ended up going to Baylor, and Baylor's a really impressive school to try to get into. Did that help you out in school and stuff like that when you were trying to get in prepared in high school for college?
It did because so one of the things, and I'll kind of breach this as a separate topic. So right, I had ADHD, which was, I would say, call that, right, the defining mental characteristic of Andrew. The Also in my life, like I lost my father very early at the age of 10, and so those two things together really set a course for my life until I really found therapy much later on in my life. Those things were, um, right. My brain works different. How do I figure out how to function like others? Plus, okay, now I don't necessarily have a male role model as a father. So how do I act as a boy, as a teen? What do I do with feelings? What do I do with emotions? Like all those sort of different things. So those two things really, at the age of 10, kind of set who Andrew was for a really long, long time, all the way into college. So that by the time I started Baylor, I pretty much knew how to adapt academically, like what I needed to do in order to get good grades, or the grades that I wanted. What I still didn't figure out by the time I went to Baylor was how what do sort of stand for? What does Andrew as a man look like? Right? I'm looking back on it. Right? I'm 21, so call myself a man, but at the point, like, what does a man look like? How do I behave? How do I treat women? How do I treat men? How do I have male relationships? And sort of figuring that out, was difficult for me going into Baylor. I think at Baylor, the really fortunate thing was that I found a good group of men who were like me. We were from Latin backgrounds. We had different family makeups. We had difficulties getting to where we were, right, in the doorstep of Baylor. But we all had this yearning to create a home for ourselves, but more importantly, to create a home for those that would come behind us. So that kind of looking beyond ourselves. And when I found that group, I really felt a sense of belonging in a place that I didn't feel right day to day. And so finding those was my uh, spring semester of my freshman years when I found these group of guys. Stayed with them. We formed a fraternity together. Still know them to this day. They're some of my best friends. Finding that group, I think, was really important going into college, and then navigating college. And it's what we all do, right? It's who we are. What do we want to be, right? What do we think of the world? What are our beliefs? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a common trait, especially with all my interviews as I interview more people, that the whole concept of going to college and feeling out of place and trying to find that comfort zone that makes you feel like you belong. And once you find that, that's helped you succeed. Is with everything that you've dealt with, have you kind of felt out of place lots of times? Is that something you have to struggle with?
Yeah, I would say it didn't stop at Baylor. So one thing, I was fortunate enough is I was able to get an internship with the company the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, and I interned with them each summer, and then eventually took a job with them as a consultant. So there was right the world of um, high school, figuring that out, right? Then you go to college. I'm different. I'm in a predominantly Caucasian and white school, right? I found my people, if you will, there. And then after that, there was this right other adjustment, which is into the professional world. And so there are a couple of like stories that I remember. One was interning one summer, and it was this dinner. So there were like partners there. The client was there, and it was this kind of buffet laid out, and we're going through serving our plates, and I go to the chafing dish, and I'm like, oh, look, this looks great. These little kind of pieces of chocolate, they're warm. And the partner behind me is like, no, those are truffles. I'm like, well, what the f is a truffle? And then we go to like a couple other ones. And there was this other food that I didn't recognize. I said something, and he was like, no, that's that. And man, talking about like it just that feeling of embarrassment where it changes your body temperature. Like that's what I had in that moment. And I realized, okay, there's a whole other world out here. And that was just like cuisine in a corporate setting, right? There's this whole other world out here that I need to figure out. So each of those kind of junctures, figured out high school, and then okay, now you're in college. Throughout college, okay, now you got to figure out this next thing with not a not a lot of role models per se. People always were rooting for me. Like I said, I was alone, and that meant like I had people behind me and who would kind of steer me in the right way. But being right alone in those situations without anyone saying, "Hey, here's how you figure out how to be alone," right? And figure out how to navigate on your own and stand up for yourself and talk for yourself. That don't necessarily think I had. And so I remember in that moment, like right now, um, like I'm the chef of the house. I'm the cook of the house. I love cooking. I set out after that particular experience. I was like, I'm going to learn as much as I can about food and the world and how to cook it and where it's made and the origins behind it, and it set me off on this thing. I love it now. But those little kind of defining moments where I felt different. Someone's laughing at me because I'm different in a professional setting. That's really is kind of burned in my memory and sparked this. Okay, I don't want to feel this. Let me figure it out. So that's one thing that I think is a really good example of for anyone who's feeling different in the moment. Um, is we can teach ourselves, that we can go find and build that curiosity, or use that curiosity to drive finding out something, whether me in that case, right, it was food. But it's how any sort of environment works, the communication, the way people are with each other.
Yeah, I have a funny story too when it comes to food. My first time I got my first job, my boss took me out for lunch. You know, a lot of boss take you out for lunch your first day at work, and he's this Scottish guy, and we go. I forget where we went to go eat, but we get hamburgers, and I was always kind of taught, don't eat first, take a second and watch. So the hamburgers come and he sets up and he pulls out a fork and knife and starts cutting the hamburger and eating the hamburger with a fork and knife. So I'm like, yeah, I guess I got to eat this hamburger with a fork and knife because I don't want to look like an asshole in front of this guy eating a big ass hamburger. And so yeah, it's kind of these little things where you're not used to it, you're not experienced with it, and you kind of have to learn by doing and find your way of being able to fit in. And I think we do that real well, with team code switching and being able to jump in there and get adapt to things. But other things that I think you mentioned in the pre-interview too is something where a lot of us aren't really good with is networking and mentoring, finding mentors and stuff. You mentioned that kind of something you missed out on a little bit. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think so in my career in banking before I started cut above, I didn't place, looking back on now, the right value on networking, mentoring, spending time with others outside of the work setting, but with your professional peers outside of the work setting. And part of that, I think, was just myself telling myself, uh, one, you can figure it out on your own. Your smarts will get you through. Your work product is enough to build your reputation. But the amount of like bonding and consideration that one gets in a professional setting based on the time spent outside of the professional setting, I think is really, really big and not right talked about. You hear the phrase, right? Deals made on the golf course. Like I think that's a true statement. So that has to do with I make up getting to know other people, being vulnerable, finding what you have in common, finding what you don't. And I just didn't think that in professional like were together. I think those were one thing. I thought, right, I could have my friends separate and I had my work life. And so I think I missed out on finding someone who, I could, hitch my wagon to, who would, kind of guide me throughout most of my career. I've had mentors. They were mostly short-lived relationships, a year at max, I would say. I know there's a mentee responsibility, right, to feed those. I didn't. I think that was a mistake on my part. I think if I were to go back, I would spend more time being in situations that I wasn't necessarily comfortable in. An example of that is college sports. So I wasn't into college sports. I'm still barely into college sports now. So right, just out of college, that's a big deal, right? You're going to the games on Saturday, you're going to the bars that are showing the games on Saturday. Well, I like didn't care to do that, so I would find something else to do, or I would go and kind of sit separate from others. I wasn't inquisitive about what it was like to go to a top 25 football college and those sort of things. I really wish I would have been, because I think I would have learned what it feels like to put myself out there. I would have um, really had people maybe remember me more in those instances, which again can pay off in a business setting, but just in like in a personal friendship setting. So I think that was one thing that I missed that I think would have helped in my career.
Yeah, and do you think that you've gotten better with stuff like networking now? I imagine with your current job, your current company, that networking is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So part of it was, I'll kind of tie this back in, right? So I didn't have my ADHD diagnosis, and I didn't really deal with some of my family of origin stuff. My father passing in at a very young age, until I was already married, and those things were jeopardizing my marriage. I've gone to therapy. I'm a huge proponent of therapy.
Mhm.
I really believe it saved my life in multiple ways. But at that point in time, I learned that this trait that had served me well, which is figure it out on your own, Andrew. You can do it on your own. And right, there were results from me thinking like that. Um, wasn't going to serve me well to function as a husband, to function as a father, to function as a good life friend for my best friends. And so I needed to be able to share things that I didn't know, ask questions that revealed I didn't know something, um, and just put myself out there more and drop the fear of how I'm going to be perceived. That was a real big one. My art, producing art, really helped with that. So by the time we got around to starting Cut Above, even though I'm an introvert by nature, so social settings drain my battery and they don't fill it up. In those settings, I always go into them charged. So I have enough battery to talk, to engage people, to be inquisitive, to hold a conversation, to share things about myself. Another family of origin thing is, I remember, like, don't really boist yourself up. Don't talk good about yourself. It looks
Mhm.
like you're arrogant or you're bragging, but that's not necessarily true, right? So I talk about the things I've accomplished, and realize people do want to know more about me. So by the time I started the company, I figured out those things. Looking back, yeah, those things would have been really nice to have figured out earlier, to have that really, confidence um, at a younger age. I think would have been helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you, like you mentioned, that helped out with your career a little bit once you started getting more involved with banking and financing. Tell me a little bit about what working in business in banking and finance was like.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It fit me really well. Working for it was a large bank, in the fact that it was a very like organized culture. Right, there's this hierarchy of chain of command. Right, there's deadlines, there's work, there's check-ins, there's milestones, and and so my life, right, part of how I needed to function was I needed to be very organized. Like things need to be in a certain spot, physically. Things need to happen at certain times of the day. So going into that, it felt right natural because it was organized in the way. It felt unnatural for a couple reasons. One, just my skin color, my background, how I would talk with my family, that code switching you talked about, but I couldn't do that. So I had to learn how to speak in a different way. Um, I understood all those things as if I want the success, I think this is going to give me the quality of life I think this is going to give me. These are things I need to do. It wasn't a like, oh, like I hate, like I'm doing this to get here. Like I understood that was the environment. And so I enjoyed corporate America with this one sort of caveat, which was I didn't ever before that have an example of what it looked like for someone to do something on their own and the positives and negatives of that. So all I knew was corporate. And so everything about it, had its negatives, but it was for the most part good. My bank kept me employed for 19 years. That was how many years I'd been with it before I left to start Cut Above. I would say they kept me happy enough to keep me from sort of looking elsewhere for the most part. And it was a good company. They did a lot of forward-looking things, work from home, great paternal leave, maternal leave, care, healthcare for their employees. It was a lot of really good things. I feel like the company had someone who was looking out for beyond right the bottom line. Um, but I think the part that either I wish I had exposure on or had done maybe a side hustle was okay. What does it look like when the effort you put out is like immediately tied to the reward or the consequence? So I could give right 100% at work and right get the work product out near the deadlines. I could give 30% and get the work product out of that same quality. So there was no necessarily motivation to work harder because the output, right? I'm on a salary, with a yearly bonus. The output that I'm going to receive back, right? The income is sort of the same. Um, I really enjoy that about my life now. If I have a day where I'm just like cranking it out, I'm gonna feel that the effort of that. A day where I'm just like slacking off, I'm gonna feel that just as acutely. And there's something I think to be said for that and people experiencing that because it gives you a real sense, or gives me a real sense of what I did with those hours of the day had a consequence. And I didn't necessarily feel that in the professional world. What I did with those hours someone else could have come in and done it. If it missed a deadline, the world wasn't going to burn down. The company wasn't going to fall apart. If I skip enough days here for Cut Above, the company's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so there's this. It's a different nearness to results that I don't know. Just it's very motivating to me. It's very attractive to me, and I think one of the motivators why I'm just really really happy with where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there as well, where you feel you're putting in all this extra effort, but and you're always like, for what? I'm still, there's other assholes doing half the work and getting promoted before I do. Why am I going to work twice as hard to get uh to get and stay where I'm at? My job now, they're very have an entrepreneurial spirit at work too, so you can kind of guide and lead your position. So even with this is one of the first jobs where I kind of felt like my manager was like, "What do you want to do with this now? How do you want to handle this moving forward?" And I'm literally getting able to plan out my career as opposed to being told where I'm going with it. And so it feels like you actually have, and I agree. That makes me want to go and work harder, make sure I don't miss deadlines, and actually finish the project early. I know you were happy with your career and you were kind of going through it, and like you mentioned, it you didn't feel like quite like putting that extra effort because you weren't getting that sensation that you get now. But sometime within that career, you started looking at art and started doing art. What kind of drove you to start doing that?
Yeah, so I would say if you went back and looked at any of my notes, the few that I took, they were just drawings.
Hmm.
It was just abstract stuff, or it was of a scene. I don't know. It was just more visual than anything else. If I think back the way I would memorize things, way I still memorize things, I memorize not necessarily the content, but I memorize where it is on the page, and then I can remember what it was. So I've always been like a visual person, and the way I say it is like my energy throughout the day isn't fully exercise through the keyboard, like my fingers typing. Like I still have this something inside me that needs to be expressed or come out. And so I was like, well, let me just try like art. So went and bought some supplies, um, started making these paintings and kind of figuring out like what it was, like how does this work. And I would do them, and I knew how I wanted what I was doing to come out, and it never would come out the way I thought it should, or the way I wanted it to. Let me say it that way. So I said, well, if I really want to do this, like I really enjoyed it. I would find myself in that alpha brainwave where like I would get started and then what felt like 2 seconds later, it's 5 hours later. Like my brain would just go into this space. Like, let me figure out the technical aspects of art. So I went to classes at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, learned about composition, color theory, the different materials, art history, all these things that I didn't have like formal education in to be able to create the types of things that I wanted. So it started a lot with color and emotions. It moved into right creating objects that we would like and see, so still lifes. Then it went into painting, people, setting scenes, letting the art um, not necessarily be like an exhibition of okay, Andrew can do this now, but more have it say something, an opinion of the world. And so when I found that, I really found this balance between my day, my analytical brain is working, and I'm in Excel, and I'm calculating, and I'm forecasting, and I'm predicting risk, and I'm assessing value to that risk. To I can turn off that whole side of my brain, and the part that activates is this still problem solving, but it's creative problem solving in that there's not necessarily an answer. Like the answer is going to show itself as I'm working through it. And so that just was a really healthy thing for me, to sort of find myself balanced, to expend that energy that really I felt was sort of sitting inside myself since I was a kid. That it really right created art. And I've sold pieces. I've had pieces in shows. I always do it for me. If people like it and buy it, that's great. I'll do it until the day I can't produce anymore. But it is a component of how I express myself. My art is.
Nice. Yeah, it's also. I mean, it's nice to have an outlet, and sometimes it feels, it fills a void that you don't always feel that you can get. It's hard for a lot of people to. A lot of people say, "Oh, if you work the job you love, you never work a day of your life." But most of us don't end up working a job we love, and we forget that sometimes we can do something we love that helps us feel that way outside of work to balance us off. And so it's great that you're able
It's
to find
that
that.
that's really different that you say that. So I've heard that before. What I say now is right. So I'm doing something that I love. I've never worked harder in my life. I've never worked harder, both the effort, like the mental effort, the physical effort, the emotional effort are just at their all time highs. The difference is that what I do, I created and I believe in, and I'm set to create like an outcome that I think makes the world a better place. And so, yes, if I'm doing something I love, doesn't feel like I'm working. I don't believe that. I believe it should feel like you are working super super hard because it's worth it, right? It's for me. It's worth it to put all this in because I know what I'm going after.
Yeah, I feel that, bro. I feel that, and so let's talk about cut above. Ultimately, what motivated you to start a zero alcohol company?
Yeah. So the story starts kind of early pandemic. I was 40 years old at the time. I was looking to consume a little bit less alcohol. Alcohol's been part of my life, or legally should have been part of my life. Um, Great ups and downs and everything's had alcohol part of their life for decades. But I wanted to cut back a little bit less, and in my mind, that felt like it was going to be something really hard to do. I've seen alcoholism in my family take family members. I've seen people who have healthy relationships with alcohol, so everything in between. So in my mind, I was right pondering these things. At about the same time, my oldest son was asking more questions about what I did at work. Like he was at the age where he wanted to understand that. And I noticed at the dining table, I was deflecting those questions. I was redirecting, not answering, really because I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I didn't feel fulfilled. I didn't feel like I was creating something that was going to be better for him in the future. So those two things, right, were happening at the same time and crossing paths. And one Saturday morning, I woke up with a hangover I'm fully responsible for. My wife had something to do. I've got the kids to take care of. And it's a terrible, shitty feeling. You're hungover and have a kid to take care of.
Yeah,
And I had this thought that there had to been a better way. We were out with celebrating a friend who I wasn't going to see what we thought was going to be like 6 months. COVID made it 3 years. And stay out that whole night, enjoy cocktails that felt like they were carefully created. They took forethought. The names were there; they were garnished the same. That I was able to order rounds of drinks, like we consume alcohol. You get around, I get around. But just be in control of the amount of alcohol, like in particular, like the ethanol component of the cocktail. So that way, maybe I wanted back at the time, like it was an old fashioned. Maybe I wanted that first old fashioned full strength. Then maybe I wanted one that had everything else but an old fashioned, but it was half as strong. Then maybe I wanted one that didn't have any alcohol. Then maybe I wanted to go back to the full strength. Like let me be in control of that. And that was a novel idea because the way the world operated before non-alcoholic existed was whatever the bartender slid across the bar, whatever strength that was, that's what you're drinking, right? If you want another, you're going to get the exact same strength. And so that was the thought. Even though I don't believe it's true, what I say is my phone was listening. So the next day I get an Instagram ad for non-alcoholic whiskey. Holy shit, didn't know this existed. Cool. So I order this non-alcoholic whiskey to my house, make my old fashioned, and it didn't deliver like the brand promised it would. Like it was close, it had some elements, but like there were a lot missing, and there were some things there that didn't necessarily belong. And so one thing that tells you a lot about my personality is sort of the next thing I did, which is I wrote myself an 80-page research paper. No one's ever seen this. It's only for me. It is 80 pages. And it was my attempt to understand if I wanted to think about this as a business, how does this work? How are spirits created? What's the history of them? What are the economics? How do they go from creation to distribution? To sales, to on premise, to bars and restaurants, to creating a brand, and what does it look like creating a brand? What do people drink? How do they drink? Why do they drink? So it was this big study I did for myself to really understand: is this something worth pursuing? It turns out, right? I took a educated guess, right, that it was, and it's only become more and more of a product that's in demand. That it is something people want. People want to be able to enjoy the social occasion, whether it's celebratory or um, consolatory or whatever it may be, to be out with others, to be in the social setting, to have a drink in hand, to not feel I'm the one with water and everyone else has this really cool cocktail that I just saw this bartender do a little show to produce. Um, and let that feeling, we call it inclusive hospitality, like let that feeling of inclusiveness sort of overwhelm the fact that I'm consuming or not consuming alcohol, that we all are okay together, and I've got this drink in my hand. And that's really what started Cut Above. It took us twice as long to develop the juice, as I call it, inside the bottles, because I wanted it to really be something that was a one for one replacement, meaning bartenders didn't have to change any of their technique or volumes when they're making cocktails. I wanted to get as possibly close as I could on the earth to the actual taste of traditional spirits, again, without the alcohol. And then I wanted it to be, right, if I was going to do it, if I was going to create something, to not just be like a competitor or another bottle on the shelf. I wanted to wrap it in something that was long lasting. I will always say I'm creating a brand, not a non alcoholic spirit. And so the name, like the Cut Above name, part of that is an homage, a tribute to those in my life that had gone a cut and above to allow me to be where I'm at. The first person is my mother, right? So my father died at the age of 10. She raised both me and my brother, by herself, pushed us into college, got us out of college, motivated us, has been like our number one cheerleader is the wrong word because she's so much more than that. I saw what it took, and I didn't appreciate because I was an adult the personal sacrifices she took in order to make that happen for us. Prime example, um, a and what is now husband of one of my cousins who was in the University of Houston when I was in high school. Say, hey, Andrew, like, yeah, I know your mom told you got to go to college, but you really do. And here's what college is like. Come walk the campus with me, right? My first foot on a college campus. And like, this looked like a pretty cool place. Didn't have to do that. Didn't have to take an interest in me, but did that. And so there's different people throughout my life that I say went a cut above to place me in places where I can make decisions to get to where I'm at now. And I think that's something we're celebrating. So we just finished our first year in business. Our second year, one of our big objectives is bringing that part of the brand out. So we're going to do recognition for those in the beverage industry and the hospitality industry that do that for their peers. And so that's important to me, that the mission of the company, which is built on allowing anyone to consume a delicious cocktail with amount of alcohol on their terms, um, so that we all have this feeling that whenever we go into a bar, you're thought about it beforehand, whether you're not consuming alcohol, and you've got this cool drink, and it has the funny name like they all do, and it's got this complex ingredient list like they all do, and it's not this little mocktail, tiny font corner, separate menu type of thing. And so, kind of back to this kind of right origin of me right in high school, it was not feeling included, and knowing that feeling and not liking that feeling. And this is a way to create an inclusive feeling in this specific instances, right? When we're consuming a drink together, whether it's out and about, right at a bar or restaurant, or whether it's, in my home. So when anyone steps foot in my threshold, I want you to feel like you're welcome. I want you to leave with a full belly. I want you to leave with a drink, um, alcohol or non-alcoholic, and a feeling that you felt a bit of respite when you were there, that you were taken care of, and you left just with good energy. There's a sign that hangs over my dining table before Cudaba was even a thought, um, and it says, "You are my kind." And so anyone who sits at my table sees the sign, and I couldn't think of, it was just an art piece, that there was any other sort of statement that made someone feel like they belonged. Right? I'm directly saying, you're my kind. We may not have the same like political beliefs, family makeup, story of origin, whatever the case may be. But man, there's always common ground between two people. Like I just really, really believe that. And it's just finding that and making it as easy as we can. And in this instance of the cut above, the common ground is we like cocktails. We like a good drink in our hand. I say a good cocktail in our hand, that's a really good feeling. And so let's just find a way to do that regardless if you're consuming alcohol or not.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And it's I can imagine how difficult it is, not just starting a business, but starting a business in an industry that's huge when it comes to alcohol and being kind of a outlier of everything and you're doing zero alcohol. What were some of the challenges you had to deal with when you were starting your company?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge was, right, I don't have a background in the industry. So it's finding others I could surround myself with that did, and that could help, right, steer where I wanted things to go. And so I found those people early on. They're still with the company, and I'm thankful for them. The other thing was that balance of, um, my personal sort of vision versus the right need to run a business, which comes down right to numbers, to profit and loss. So as much as, right, as I want to bring all these things about at the brand, right, they all cost money, right? And so the right company doesn't make money unless I sell bottles. So how do I, you know, take myself as a natural introvert, turn myself into the head of a company, which means I'm the face of the brand, which means I'm talking about it, which means I'm proud of it, which means I'm sharing, I'm open, I'm handing out cards, I'm at a dinner talking with someone who buys the liquor for the restaurant, and right, finding that person. So those things that aren't necessarily innate to my personality, I think, were some of the earliest challenges. I've it's been a year, right? So I think I've done a good job of adapting and being that person. The cool thing is, like, I'm not adapting to be someone I'm not. I'm kind of growing into this person that it has kind of been there, that is needed to accomplish what I want to do, for the company. So that's been the biggest challenge, right? Kind of those personal, ways of being that are now different. And then I would say behind that, being able to stay in the moment. I know people talk about that all the time. Right? Just being in the moment, don't live in that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are days where it feels like this is the worst decision I've ever made in my life. Where, like, I've let my family down, I've jeopardized so much for this, and it was a mistake. There are days where this is going to be fucking amazing. It's going to be even bigger than I thought it was going to be. It's going to be incredible. And I try to, in that day, right, sit in that high or the low or whatever feeling is in between. And then when I wake up the next day, like, reset because for me, those are such strong feelings um, that if I kind of carry them day over day, it sort of clouds what I need to do right in that given that next day. So those two things have been, I would say, the hardest, but the things that have made the most impact.
Yeah, I love that last part of where you're talking about how excited you are and how sometimes you feel like you're making a thing. And I think one of the big things is I don't know if you've read the book, the Start with Why, where the how and the what makes no difference as long as you have a solid why. And even from the get go, you didn't start off of what you were doing. You were telling me why you wanted to do this. And I think that solid whys was kind of hopefully kept you motivated and kept you going even when you were on the lows. So I commend you for that. I mean, that's awesome. And I really appreciate that. And obviously, coming up with flavors that match the flavors of alcohol can be difficult. If anybody who's ever had banana flavored anything, flavors don't always match right exactly what you're expecting. What is that process like for trying to figure out the flavors?
Yeah, so we enlisted flavor specialists who understand how to take natural flavors. When we built Cut Above, I didn't want to say we I didn't want to right remove alcohol and then put a bunch of bad stuff in. So the flavors are natural, they're naturally derived. And the challenge was, like, let's take gin, which London dry style gin is juniper forward. Behind that has like cardamom, like a suite of botanicals, and usually like a citrus finish. So how do we find a way to take all those flavors from a natural state? So we have right juniper oil in our gin. And the challenge was how do we combine them in the right way that they stay bonded together without the ethanol molecule sitting in between them, which grabs on to a lot of those flavors. And so that was the hard part. So anyway, if you're just distilling a traditional gin, it's how do I mix a little bit of this and that and make the flavor that I want and bottle it. So the same thing is on the non-alcoholic side. The difference is that we don't have ethanol, which does a shit ton of work keeping flavors together and bringing things out of flavors. So that twice as long was going through iteration after iteration after iteration. And when we're developing 4 at a time, we just say, "Hey, we're gonna do a gin," and then after that, we're doing gin, we're doing mezcal, we're doing agave blanco, which is tequila expression, and we're doing whiskey all at the same time. And so the way it would work is we would say, "Hey, we want it like this." We would get created, we would get the sample for each one of those. We'd have 3 bottles. We would taste all those neat. We would make cocktails with them. We would taste them against traditional spirits. We would taste them against other non-alcoholic spirits, and we would there were 3 of us, and we kind of came together and said, "This is what I like, don't like, we should do this, we should do that." We would wait a month, get another iteration, and then do it over and over. And so it was almost 2 years of that, over and over and over again. So we got to the point where one thing I noticed about some of the other products on the market was they were really watery. So they would taste okay, neat. I would make a cocktail that first sip would be okay, but then after dilution occurs, it just became like a almost like a flavored water kind of version of a cocktail. And so we had to make sure like it held up. So we would let a cocktail sit and let the ice melt and then taste it and see what happened. So all that work was the hard part of how we make Cut Above. When people ask me, "Oh, like how is it made? It must be really hard." Like we take our flavors that we own, right? We have a proprietary formula. We blend it together with some really highly filtered water, and we bottle it in the same day, right? There's no aging, there's no putting it in barrels, there's no distilling or removing alcohol. That part is fast because the part ahead of it was really long and tedious.
Nice. And you talked about bottling. Is it what you have a factory that does it, or outsource that, or how's that process?
Yeah, we have partners. We have 2 partners that bottle it for us and produce it. We picked partners that had experience both in spirits, creating spirits, bottling spirits, and also non-alcoholic. They're governed by two different governing bodies, and there's a lot of these right entering the market. Right, as you know, right there's demand for this, both beer, wine, and spirits, and so we wanted partners who understood why we created it in the way we did, and then we're of course willing to do their part of the manufacturing process.
Yeah, I know when I've looked at other bottles of alcohol, one of the things I like of non-alcoholic beer, one thing I liked about your company was that I felt like you're actually buying a bottle of liquor as opposed to buying a bottle of alcohol, a non-alcoholic beer, because you go to other places or tiny little bottles, mason jars, fancy little boxes, or something crazy, and you're like, this doesn't feel like I'm buying alcohol. Now I have your liquor on my bar. It's like I have my bottles there. People can come and see. It's
Love
like, oh look, I have my bar,
it.
my non-alcoholic liquor. It looks like a real liquor in
Yeah.
the house. And so I really love that about that. And so, um, what do you feel is for your company? I know you talked about being able to give back and recognize people, but what other things you're expecting to be able to accomplish in the next year or so with Cut Above?
Yeah, so our next year, a couple other things. Like we want to grow, obviously, right? If I didn't say that, probably wouldn't be a good founder of a company. But in specific ways. So I'm big on growing sustainably. So there are ways we could have grown slightly faster, but it would have damaged the brand. An example of that is like we would have run out of supply and had to put sold out signs on stuff, or a distributor wants stuff and we can't produce it. So growing in a sustainable way, finding distributors so that we're distributed across the United States and all the different states, and then bringing in our initial sales force, or what can be called, right, brand ambassadors or initial salespeople. That is going to be hard for me in particular because of the care I have for the brand. So when we talk about cut above, we talk differently than other non-alcoholic spirits. The cut part of cut above is part of that choice that I talked about earlier. So we actually own a trademark, what we call the zero cut classic system. So the zero is you're gonna make a gin and tonic, you're only gonna use cut above gin. The cut, you're going to make a gin and tonic instead of 2 ounces of a traditional, for me, was Tanqueray gin. I'm going to use 1 ounce. I'm going to sub the other ounce in for cut above. So it's a low ABV cocktail. The flavor and everything stays there, and it's just as strong. And then you have your classic, which is your 2 ounce Tanqueray gin and tonic that we've had forever. So when we go out and we talk about cut above, we're never anti alcohol. We believe in the autonomy of the person, that for the most part, people know what's best for them in that time, in that moment. And we are here to provide the best product to allow you to make that choice. So the job over the next year is to take that message in a very simple form and deliver it to the consumer, so that it's never been about, we created a non-alcoholic spirit. If you don't drink, this is for you. And if you drink, you've already got your stuff. We don't care about you. My approach has been non-alcoholic spirits are for everybody. So some of us are no alcohol whatsoever. Some of us are want to reduce a little bit all the time. Some of us I want to reduce to zero for a given month. And then some of us are, whatever else on the spectrum. Cut above is to fit in all of those. That's the value proposition we talk about when it comes to the business side of things. And so finding the right people, in addition to, right, Andrew, telling this story message that can talk about it in that way is going to be important for us. And then the third thing, like you talked about, bringing that recognition piece out to it, which is a whole different sort of personality of the brand, and I would say even probably even more core to what we are. Right, the product and inclusivity is kind of the initial thing, and then beyond that is, okay. Now let's talk about how we give back and how we celebrate those in the industry, because that's the part that's really exciting to me. Like, I love hearing stories of how someone affected someone else's life in a positive manner, and being able to have the brand behind that is, I don't know, I'm really excited to get to that point.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, it's funny the way you talk about it, where you could create the three different versions of the gin and tonic. And I think a lot of us, when we go out with buddies, and we always have that one buddy that had too much to drink, wish we could have give them the rum and coke that tastes like rum and coke but had no alcohol. It's like, no, keep drinking, it's okay. And
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like, oh, I can't believe I didn't get a hangover with everything I drank last night. So is your bottles now available at different bars? I'm assuming in Houston.
Yeah, so we're available nationwide at drinkcutabove.com. UPS shows up at your doorstep 3 days later with the bottle. We're sold at Home Goods nationwide. You can find our four expressions there. And then we grow right into bars and restaurants. So depending on where you're at, we go after places that have strong cocktail programs and appreciation for cocktails, and retailers that understand, like, we are a crafted product. Um, I always had to say, like, we're not like premium, like top shelf, ridiculously premium, but we're like we believe we're better than other things on the market, and so people that understand that storytelling and why we think that is important for us. We grow every month in terms of our retail presence, in terms of our bar and restaurant presence, both here in Houston, but then across the U.S.
Nice. Awesome. And yeah, what's it called? I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, but I always like to end my interviews with one question. Just kind of we started with a big question. I like to end with a big question too.
Sure.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself as a younger person and give yourself some advice, what's something you tell yourself?
I would tell myself that um, everything is going to be okay, and whatever you're feeling, whether it's sadness, anger, happiness, joy, everything in between, it will pass. I think I would have really liked to have someone tell me that at multiple points in my life.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. I really wish you guys all the best. I know it's difficult running any business, and so you have a lot of challenges. And I'm just glad to see that one, it's making you happy as well. So congrats to you on that.
Of course, no, thank you very much. If we have a few minutes, so one thing I feel like I didn't necessarily touch on, which and it's in the spirit of your podcast, is
Sure.
what does it mean for all these things I've talked about being of Mexican American descent? And so I want to, if we have some time,
Yeah.
just
No,
kind of
this is
touch
this
on
is
that a little
this is
bit.
on you. Don't think I have to
Okay.
cut us off. Go on. If you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
more
yeah.
you want
No,
to talk about,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of what I said is kind of true, regardless of someone's background. So if I kind of go back to kind of the Andrew in high school, right, figuring things out. Right, skin color is the most evident way I felt different. But there were cultural things as well. The way our families would celebrate together, right? Certain holidays, speaking Spanish, right? When most things are in English. Um, I have a broken vocabulary in Spanish at best. I try to know enough to keep up with my kids. I regret that I didn't take a passion early on for wanting to know more Spanish. I realize how useful it is in business and in life. But at the time, in high school, wanting to assimilate, wanting to be like my friends who were white and who were American in any definition of that. I didn't place an importance on Spanish as a language, and I wish I would have. So that's one thing I want to make sure I say, that Spanish is a beautiful language, and all variations and dialects of it. It is spoken widely in Houston and Texas and in the United States and in the world. So I want to make sure that I state the importance of Spanish as a language. My kids learn Spanish as their first language.
Oh, nice.
The second thing is I didn't place an importance until I got to college on understanding what it meant to be Mexican American as a whole beyond sort of my family and origin story. So understanding the way the border between the U.S. and Mexico worked, and why is there a border and why is it treated the way it is now? Migrant work, how that functioned originally versus how it is now. Um, the struggles of everyone from Central and South America coming into the U.S., retaining their cultural identity while also finding success. I studied that in college, and I found an appreciation for it. And so I want to say that I think that's an important thing to be able to know not only one's family history but your people's history and what you want to take and write and pass on. And then in business as well. When I started the bank, I was one of the founding members. It was Ola for short, Hispanic. I can remember what the other letters stand for at the moment. But it was a group that brought together all different, right, Latin backgrounds, and so that I really enjoyed because it was an understanding of the differences between countries in Latin America, and the from dialect to food to families and all those different things. In earlier ages, like in high school, I remember it being like If you were brown skin, you were Mexican.
Mhm.
Like you could have been from Guatemala, like you were Mexican. And so having that understanding of what it meant to be from these different countries and all the things that they bring to the table, I think is really important. So that for me, I could speak out when it says, no, that's actually a different culture you're talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, we both speak Spanish as countries of origin, but it's really different, and here's why. And Tex-Mex food is not Mexican food, and all these different things. So understanding, I think, the different components that make up the beautiful geography that is Latin America, I think, is important. And then doing things like this, like what I think you're doing is amazing, which is bringing examples of those who have had success, who are from Latin American descent, and putting it out there so that others can see maybe a reflection of themselves. And like I said, most Latinos in my head, right, speak Spanish. I don't, but I know there's a lot of Latinos who don't speak Spanish.
Mhm.
And so, or like I said, I can get back into a corner really quickly and then not know how to say something. And so just knowing that, like, that's okay. Like, not every Latin American is the same. They don't all speak the same level of Spanish. They don't have the same family origin story. They come from a different country that has a different culture. And so, seeing any time in my life where I wish I would have seen someone like me, um, that's why I really love what you're doing, because I think hopefully, like in my mind, it does that for someone, with all the gifts that you've had, all the gifts that you will have. So I just wanted to make sure that I kind of circled back at the end and talked about what I think is the importance of me being of Mexican American heritage, how that played out in my life, and why I think it's important to be talked about, to be celebrated, to never be made as a minor trait of who I am. It is a trait of who I am, in addition to all other things about my personality. And so it's important, and I wanted to make sure I closed on that message.
No, I appreciate that, and you touch a nerve with me on that as well because I think for a lot of us, we feel sometimes we try to fit in to the point that we ignore some of who we are and what we are. I think the same exact way as you were. When I was in high school, I didn't go to a white school; it was predominantly black. But I wanted to be more black than I was Hispanic or Latino. I didn't listen to Spanish music. My mom played salsa merengue. I didn't want to listen to it. And I have the story of this Spanish lady Colombian lady that lived downstairs, and I was talking to her. My Spanish was broken. My Spanish was broken, and she told me in Spanish, "You should be ashamed of yourself that you were born in Peru and you can't speak Spanish." And after that, I stopped speaking Spanish. Like somebody would talk to me in Spanish, I'd respond in English, and I would not respond in Spanish. And for years, and like you, it wasn't until I got to college that I started to learn to appreciate who I was, to appreciate my language, to appreciate my culture, and now I I feel more like me, and I can be proud of who I am and where I'm at, and I'm not afraid of it. And the same thing, I'm Peruvian. Everybody in Texas thought I was Mexican, and I'm like, I'm proud Peruvian. I do Peruvian parties. I had Peruvian Independence Day parties in Texas, and I invite Mexican friends and send them Peruvian recipes. Say, here, learn to cook some Peruvian food and bring it to the party. And so it's just I totally agree with you on all of that, man, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. So. But once again, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you all the success, and hopefully I can get you back on in a future time for more stuff as well.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for having me, Raul.
Oh, thank you, and for everyone else listening, thank you again for all the support. I appreciate all the positive words I've been getting, and hope you'll join me again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.